The day the Vampire King stopped being able to walk was the day the world decided he was no longer worth fearing. The headline had appeared on every supernatural news feed in the country 3 years ago, and even now, Claire Bennett still remembered seeing it while eating a $2 microwave dinner in the break room of a nursing home outside Boston. Back then, the story had felt distant, like something from another universe. Kings belonged in history books. Vampires belonged in rumors. And powerful men certainly did not end up trapped in wheelchairs. Yet on a gray October morning, with cold rain tapping against the windows of a black SUV, Claire found herself driving through iron gates taller than a 3-story building, entering the estate of the most feared ruler in the vampire world. Blackwood Manor stood on a hill overlooking miles of dark forest, its stone towers disappearing into low clouds. The place looked less like a home and more like a kingdom that had been forgotten by time. Claire tightened her grip on the steering wheel. She had accepted the job because she needed the money. Medical bills from her late mother's illness had left her drowning in debt. Her apartment lease was hanging by a thread. The salary being offered by Blackwood Manor was more than she could earn in 3 years at any ordinary caregiving position. Still, as she parked near the front entrance and stepped into the cold air, she wondered if she had made a mistake. 2 guards in dark uniforms opened the enormous doors before she could reach them. Neither smiled. Neither spoke. Inside, the manor felt strangely silent. The marble floors gleamed beneath crystal chandeliers. Massive portraits lined the walls. Every face seemed to be watching her. Miss Bennett. A woman in a charcoal suit approached. She looked to be in her 60s, though with vampires it was impossible to tell. I am Eleanor Graves, chief steward of the estate. Claire offered a polite smile. Nice to meet you. Eleanor nodded once. There are several rules. Claire had expected that. Okay. You will address His Majesty respectfully. You will not discuss his condition with outsiders. You will not enter restricted areas. And most importantly, Eleanor paused. Do not mistake kindness for familiarity. Claire blinked. Meaning? Many caregivers have come here believing they could help him. Eleanor's expression hardened. None lasted more than 2 weeks. The words lingered as they walked through long hallways and up a private elevator. The higher they climbed, the quieter the manor became. By the time the elevator doors opened, Claire could no longer hear anything at all. No footsteps. No voices. No distant conversations. Just silence. Eleanor led her down a corridor lined with floor-to-ceiling windows. Rain streaked the glass. Beyond it stretched endless forest. He spends most of his time here, Eleanor said. Reading. Working. Watching. Watching what? Claire asked. Everything. They stopped outside a pair of dark wooden doors. Eleanor turned toward her. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across the older woman's face. One final warning. Claire waited. Do not pity him. Then Eleanor pushed the doors open. The room beyond was enormous. Shelves filled with books climbed toward a vaulted ceiling. A fire crackled softly in a stone fireplace. Large windows overlooked the storm outside. And near the center of the room sat a man in a wheelchair. Claire had seen photographs of Damien Blackwood before. None of them had prepared her for seeing him in person. He looked younger than she expected, perhaps mid-30s by human standards, though rumors claimed he was over 400 years old. His dark hair fell neatly across his forehead. His skin was pale enough to seem carved from marble. A black sweater covered broad shoulders. One hand rested on the arm of the chair. The other held an open book. He did not look up when they entered. Your Majesty, Eleanor said. Miss Bennett has arrived. Silence. Several seconds passed. Then another page turned. Claire exchanged a glance with Eleanor. The steward looked entirely unsurprised. Finally Damien spoke without lifting his eyes from the book. The last one cried. His voice was calm. Deep. Controlled. The one before her fainted. Another page turned. And the one before that asked for a photograph. Claire waited. Damien closed the book at last. Slowly, he raised his gaze toward her. The room seemed colder. His eyes were unlike anything she had ever seen. Silver gray. Sharp. Intelligent. Tired. Not physically tired. Something deeper than that. The exhaustion of someone who had carried too much for too long. "Which one are you?" he asked. Claire considered the question. "Hopefully none of them." For a moment, nobody moved. Eleanor looked alarmed. Damien simply stared. Then one eyebrow lifted slightly. "Interesting answer." Claire shrugged. "You asked." A faint spark of surprise appeared in his eyes. "Gone almost instantly. Most people are afraid of me. Should I be?" Damien studied her. The rain tapped against the windows. The fire crackled softly. Somewhere in the manor, a clock chimed. "Probably," he said. Claire nodded. "Good to know." Another silence followed. This one felt different. Less hostile. Eleanor looked as though she wanted to interrupt but thought better of it. Damien finally glanced toward the window. "Leave us." Eleanor hesitated. "Your Majesty, leave us." The steward bowed her head and exited. The doors closed behind her. Claire and Damien were alone. For several seconds neither spoke. Then Damien rolled his wheelchair toward the window overlooking the forest. "Tell me, Miss Bennet." His voice softened slightly. "Why did you take this job?" Claire answered honestly. "Because I needed it." "Money?" "Mostly." "Not because you wanted to help a broken king?" No, the corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile. "Good." He stared out at the rain. "The people who come here trying to save me are always disappointed." Claire followed his gaze toward the dark woods below. Maybe they came looking for the wrong thing. Damien turned slightly toward her. For the first time, genuine curiosity appeared in his expression. Outside, thunder rolled across the hills. And somewhere beneath the calm surface of Blackwood Manor, something unseen seemed to shift, as if the arrival of one ordinary human woman had set an invisible story into motion. The next morning, Claire discovered that Blackwood Manor operated less like a home and more like a nation. Hidden inside stone walls. By 7 o'clock, staff members were already moving through the corridors with quiet efficiency. Gardeners tended the grounds despite the cold weather. Assistants carried folders filled with reports. Security personnel monitored entrances and communication channels. Everything revolved around one person. Damien Blackwood. And yet, as Claire sat at a long dining table drinking coffee, she noticed something strange. Nobody spoke about him unless absolutely necessary. It was as if his name carried weight even inside his own house. "Does everyone always whisper around here?" Claire asked. Eleanor Graves glanced up from a tablet. "Whisper? Nobody seems comfortable saying what they actually think." Eleanor returned her attention to the screen. "That is often the safest choice." Claire frowned. "Why?" "Because opinions have consequences." Before Claire could ask another question, a young assistant hurried into the room carrying several newspapers. He placed them carefully on the table and left. Claire's attention immediately drifted toward the headlines. Most were ordinary financial and political stories. One article, however, featured a photograph of Damien. The image appeared to have been taken months ago. He sat in his wheelchair during some official ceremony, expression unreadable. The headline made Claire's stomach tighten. "Is the age of Blackwood finally over?" Another read, "Can a king who cannot stand still lead?" A third was even worse. "The immortal recluse who refuses to let go of power." Claire looked up. People really write this stuff? Eleanor's expression did not change. "Every day." "And he reads it?" Every day. Claire stared at the newspapers. Something about the articles bothered her. They did not criticize Damien for actions. They criticized him for weakness. For being injured. For surviving. The realization sat heavily in her chest. 2 hours later, Claire reported to Damien's private study. She expected to find him reading. Instead, she found him working. Multiple screens glowed across a large desk. Financial reports, infrastructure plans, international agreements, environmental studies. The amount of information was overwhelming. Damien moved between tasks with remarkable speed. His wheelchair sat behind the desk like an afterthought. Claire stopped near the doorway. "You do all of this yourself?" Damien barely glanced up. "Most of it." "That seems impossible." "Fortunately, I have had 4 centuries to practice." Claire almost smiled. Damien signed a document. Then another. Then another. "You may sit if you intend to continue staring." Claire pulled out a chair. "I thought kings spent their days sitting on thrones." "A common misconception." "Then what do kings do?" Damien leaned back slightly. "They solve problems nobody else wants." The answer surprised her. For the next hour she observed quietly. People entered carrying reports. Damien reviewed each one. Decisions were made within minutes. Funding approved. Projects adjusted. Policies revised. He never hesitated. Never second-guessed himself. By lunchtime Claire understood something important. Whatever had happened to Damien physically had not diminished his mind. If anything, it had sharpened it. Around noon, a messenger arrived carrying an urgent file. The moment Damien opened it, his expression changed. Not dramatically. Just enough for Claire to notice. "Bad news?" she asked after the messenger left. Damien stared at the document. "There is a town in northern Maine experiencing unusual winter conditions." Claire blinked. Winter conditions? In October. That was strange. Even stranger was the concern in Damien's voice. "How unusual?" she asked. 3 feet of snow overnight. Claire nearly dropped her coffee. "That is impossible." Damien's eyes remained fixed on the report. "Yes." The room fell silent. After several moments, Damien closed the folder. "Cancel my afternoon schedule." An assistant nearby looked confused. "Your Majesty, the council meeting, cancel it." "But the council representatives have already arrived." Damien's expression hardened. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. "Then they can enjoy the drive home." The assistant immediately nodded and disappeared. Claire watched carefully. Something important was happening. Something nobody was explaining. Later that evening she found herself wandering through one of the manor's western corridors. The storm from yesterday had passed, leaving the grounds wrapped in silver moonlight. Most of the house was quiet. Then she heard it. A sound. Faint. Distant. Almost hidden. Claire stopped walking. The sound came again. Not a voice. Not exactly. More like someone struggling to breathe through pain. Her pulse quickened. She followed the noise down another hallway. Then another. The farther she walked, the colder the air became. Finally she reached a heavy iron door. The sound was coming from behind it. Claire hesitated. Every instinct told her to leave. Then the sound came again. This time she recognized it immediately. It was Damien. Concern pushed aside caution. She reached for the handle. Locked. Through a narrow gap she could see faint light inside. And movement. Damien sat alone in the center of a circular chamber surrounded by symbols carved into black stone. Candles burned around him. His hands gripped the arms of his wheelchair so tightly his knuckles appeared white. Sweat glistened across his forehead. His jaw remained clenched. Every muscle seemed locked in silent effort. Claire's heart pounded. She had never seen anyone look so exhausted. Yet what shocked her most was not his condition. It was what happened next. The symbols surrounding him suddenly flickered with pale silver light. The chamber trembled almost imperceptibly. Damien closed his eyes. For one brief second the lights intensified. Then everything went dark again. Silence returned. Complete silence. Claire stepped backward. Her mind raced. What had she just witnessed? A ritual? Some kind of treatment? Before she could decide, a voice spoke behind her. You should not be here. Claire spun around. Eleanor stood in the corridor. Her face looked unusually pale. What was that? Claire asked. Eleanor's expression tightened. Something you must forget. I cannot forget that. You must. Claire glanced back toward the iron door. Is he sick? Eleanor looked away. No. Then what is happening? For several seconds the older woman said nothing. Finally she answered in a voice barely above a whisper. Every night, while the world sleeps, Damien Blackwood carries a burden nobody else knows exists. Claire stared at her. What does that mean? Eleanor's eyes filled with something Claire had never seen before. Fear. Genuine fear. It means, Eleanor said quietly, that if he ever stops doing whatever is happening inside that room, all of us may discover how much we depended on him. Then she turned and walked away, leaving Claire alone in the cold corridor with questions that suddenly felt far more dangerous than answers. Claire barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the silver light spreading across the floor of the hidden chamber. She heard Eleanor's warning. And most of all, she remembered the look on Damien's face. It was not the expression of a king protecting power. It was the expression of someone carrying a weight too heavy for anyone to see. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Sunlight spilled across the hills surrounding Blackwood Manor, turning the distant forests gold and silver. From the outside, everything looked peaceful. Inside, however, tension seemed to hang in the air. Staff members moved faster than usual. Security teams occupied positions throughout the estate. Conversations stopped whenever Claire entered a room. Something was happening. She felt it. Shortly after breakfast, she entered Damien's study and immediately noticed the difference. 3 large monitors displayed news broadcasts from across the country. Government officials appeared on one screen. Meteorologists appeared on another. A third showed footage from a small coastal town. Snow covered everything. Cars. Homes. Roads. Fishing docks. Children stood outside building snowmen beneath skies that should have belonged to January, not October. Damien sat behind his desk studying the reports. His expression remained calm, but the tightness around his eyes had returned. Claire approached slowly. The town in Maine? Damien nodded. There are 6 more now. Her stomach dropped. 6? He tapped a key. A map appeared on one screen. Red markers glowed across the northeastern United States. Maine. Vermont. Upstate New York. Northern Michigan. Parts of Minnesota. Claire stared. How is that possible? That is the question everyone is asking. She looked at him. And you know the answer. Damien remained silent. Silence was answer enough. Before Claire could press further, the doors opened. Eleanor entered carrying a stack of documents. Behind her came 4 unfamiliar individuals dressed in expensive suits. The atmosphere changed immediately. Damien's posture straightened. Eleanor's expression hardened. The visitors looked confident. Too confident. Claire recognized the type. People who believed power belonged to them. The council delegation has arrived, Eleanor announced. Damien's face revealed nothing. Of course they have. The tallest visitor stepped forward. His silver hair was perfectly styled. His smile appeared practiced rather than genuine. "Your Majesty." Damien inclined his head slightly. "Lord Ashford." The greeting sounded more like an obligation than a welcome. Ashford glanced briefly toward Claire before returning his attention to Damien. "The council is concerned." "The council is always concerned." One of the women behind Ashford frowned. Another opened a folder. Damien did not appear impressed. Claire quietly moved toward the side of the room, observing. "Weather anomalies continue spreading," Ashford said. "Markets are reacting. Investors are nervous. Communities are asking questions." Damien folded his hands. "Then answer them." Ashford's smile thinned. "We were hoping for guidance." "You have guidance. Perhaps not enough." The conversation sounded ordinary. Yet beneath every word flowed something sharper. Claire could feel it. A struggle hidden beneath politeness. Ashford took another step forward. "Many believe stronger leadership is required." The room became still. Damien's eyes lifted slowly. "Do they?" "There are concerns regarding your ability to manage the crisis." Nobody spoke for several seconds. Claire watched Damien carefully. Most people would have reacted emotionally. Anger. Frustration. Defensiveness. Damien showed none of those things. Instead, he looked tired. Not surprised. Not offended. Simply tired. As though he had heard the same argument 1,000 times. "My ability," Damien repeated. Quietly. "Yes." Ashford's voice remained respectful on the surface. "The situation grows more serious each day." Claire looked from one man to the other. Finally she understood. This meeting was not about weather. It was about Damien. They were testing him. Looking for weakness. Looking for a reason. Damien turned his chair toward the window. Sunlight illuminated the pale profile of his face. "Tell me something, Ashford." "Of course. When was the last time you visited one of those towns?" Ashford hesitated. "That is not my responsibility." "No." Damien nodded slightly. "It is not." He pointed toward the screen showing snow-covered streets. "And yet the people living there are your responsibility." Nobody answered. Damien continued. "Have you spoken with the families affected?" Silence. "Visited the hospitals?" Silence. "Met the mayors?" Still silence. Damien finally looked back toward them. "Then perhaps your concern is not leadership." Ashford's expression tightened. The meeting ended 10 minutes later. The council representatives left looking dissatisfied. Eleanor followed them out. Claire remained behind. Damien stared at the map. More red markers had appeared. "You knew they were trying to challenge you." Damien nodded. "Yes. Why not defend yourself?" A faint smile appeared. Sad. Brief. Gone almost instantly. People rarely change their minds because they lose an argument. Claire sat across from him. Then how do they change? Damien looked toward the distant horizon. Reality eventually forces them to. The answer lingered long after the conversation ended. That evening Claire found herself unable to stop thinking about everything she had seen. The council. The weather anomalies. The hidden chamber. The strange exhaustion behind Damien's eyes. None of it fit together. Yet somehow she knew it was connected. Shortly after midnight she left her room and walked quietly through the manor. The corridors were empty. Moonlight spilled across polished floors. Outside, the wind whispered through ancient trees. Eventually she reached the western wing again. Reached the iron door again. And once more she heard it. Not pain. Not exactly. Effort. Endless effort. Claire moved closer. Through the narrow opening she saw Damien inside the chamber. The candles burned brighter tonight. The symbols along the floor glowed silver and blue. Damien sat motionless at the center. Yet the air itself seemed alive around him. Light flowed across the stone in slow waves. The temperature dropped. Frost appeared briefly along the edges of the walls before fading away. Claire watched in silent amazement. Then something unexpected happened. Damien opened his eyes. Directly toward the door. Directly toward her. For one suspended moment neither moved. Claire's heart stopped. He knew she was there. He had known all along. The silver light reflected inside his eyes, making them seem ancient beyond measure. Tired beyond measure. And strangely alone. Then the light vanished. The chamber fell dark. The door slowly opened from the inside. Damien sat there in complete silence. Looking at her. Waiting. And for the first time since arriving at Blackwood Manor, Claire realized she was standing at the edge of a truth powerful enough to change everything she thought she knew about the king the world had already decided to hate. Claire should have looked away. She should have apologized and returned to her room. Instead, she stood frozen in the doorway as Damien watched her from across the chamber. The silver glow had vanished, but traces of cold still lingered in the air. The symbols carved into the stone floor appeared lifeless now, nothing more than ancient markings etched by forgotten hands. Yet Claire knew better. She had seen them shine. She had seen the impossible. Neither of them spoke for several seconds. Damien finally broke the silence. "You have a habit of ignoring instructions." His voice sounded tired. Not angry. Not surprised. Simply tired. Claire swallowed. "You knew I was here before tonight." "Yes." "Then why did you let me keep coming back?" Damien looked toward the dark symbols surrounding him. "Because eventually curiosity always wins." Claire stepped into the chamber. The massive iron door remained open behind her. "What is this place?" Damien studied her face carefully, as though deciding how much truth she could handle. "A prison." Claire glanced around. "It does not look like one." The strongest prisons rarely do. The answer only created more questions. She moved closer. For the first time she noticed faint cracks running through several of the stone symbols. Tiny fractures. Almost invisible. What happened here? Damien followed her gaze. Time. Claire frowned. That is not a real answer. A faint trace of amusement appeared in his eyes. It is when you have lived long enough. Despite everything, she found herself smiling slightly. Damien noticed. The amusement disappeared almost immediately, replaced by something more guarded. He wheeled himself toward the edge of the chamber. Claire stepped aside to give him room. As he passed, she noticed how pale he looked. More pale than usual. His hands trembled almost imperceptibly before becoming steady again. Most people would never have seen it. Claire did. "You are exhausted." Damien stopped moving. That observation did not require a midnight investigation. No. Claire folded her arms. But it explains one. For a moment he simply stared at her. Then he surprised her. He laughed. The sound was brief. Quiet. Almost unfamiliar, as though he had not used it in years. "You are remarkably stubborn." "I have been told that before." "Frequently?" "More than once." The ghost of a smile lingered at the corner of Damien's mouth. Then it faded. He looked toward the ceiling above them. "You should go back to bed." Claire did not move. "No." His eyebrows lifted slightly. "No?" "Not until somebody tells me what is happening." Damien sighed softly. The sound carried centuries of weariness. "And if I refuse?" Claire thought for a moment. "Then I will probably keep asking." Silence followed. Somewhere deep within the manor, an old clock struck 1 in the morning. One slow chime after another. Damien listened. When the final note faded, he spoke. "Tell me something, Claire." "Okay. Before you came here, what did you think I was?" The question caught her off guard. "You mean before I met you?" "Yes." Claire considered the answer carefully. "Honestly?" "Always." She looked down at the floor. "I thought you were probably exactly what the news said." Damien nodded once. Not offended. Not surprised. "And now?" Claire met his eyes. "Now I think everyone is missing something." The chamber grew quiet again. Damien studied her face for so long that she began to wonder if she had said the wrong thing. Finally he looked away. "Most people prefer simple stories." "What does that mean?" "Heroes. Villains. Monsters. Victims." His voice softened. "Simple stories make people comfortable." Claire glanced toward the ancient symbols. "And the truth?" "The truth is usually inconvenient." Before she could respond, a sudden vibration moved through the floor beneath them. Small. Subtle. Yet impossible to miss. Claire felt it immediately. Damien did too. Every trace of humor vanished from his expression. He turned sharply toward the center of the chamber. Another vibration followed. Stronger this time. The cracks inside several symbols brightened faintly. Silver light flickered beneath the stone. Claire's pulse accelerated. "What was that?" Damien did not answer. He rolled forward quickly, positioning himself near the largest symbol carved into the floor. The silver glow intensified. Not bright. Not dangerous. Just enough to illuminate the room with an eerie light. Claire watched in amazement. The air temperature dropped several degrees. Frost formed briefly along the edges of nearby candles. Damien closed his eyes. His shoulders tightened. The glow pulsed once. Twice. Then gradually faded. Silence returned. Complete silence. Claire stared. What just happened? Damien opened his eyes slowly. The exhaustion she saw there frightened her more than the silver light. A reminder. Of what? He looked directly at her. Of why I cannot afford to fail. Claire waited. This time she sensed he wanted to explain. Wanted to tell someone. Yet some invisible wall still held the words back. Eventually Damien turned away. "Go to bed, Claire." Frustration rose inside her. "You keep saying that." "Because it is 2 in the morning. And because you do not want to answer questions." "That too." Claire opened her mouth. Then closed it again. Arguing would not help. Not tonight. She exhaled slowly. "Fine." Damien nodded once. Wise decision. She started toward the door. Halfway there she stopped. Something had been bothering her since the council meeting. Since the newspapers. Since her first day in the manor. She turned back. "Can I ask one last question?" Damien looked up. "You are going to ask it regardless." "Probably." Another faint smile appeared. "Go ahead." Claire hesitated. "If everyone hates you so much." The words hung in the air. "Why do you keep helping them?" For the first time that night, Damien seemed genuinely surprised. Not by the question itself. By the fact that someone had asked it. The chamber became perfectly still. Finally he looked toward the dark ceiling overhead. "Because whether they hate me or not changes nothing." His voice was almost a whisper now. "They are still my people." Claire felt something tighten painfully inside her chest. No bitterness. No anger. No resentment. Just responsibility. Endless responsibility. She left the chamber a few minutes later with more questions than answers. Yet one thing had changed. For the first time since arriving at Blackwood Manor, she no longer saw Damien Blackwood as a mysterious king hidden behind rumors and headlines. She saw a man carrying something enormous entirely alone. And somewhere deep inside, a realization began taking shape. Whatever secret was hidden beneath the manor, whatever force was spreading impossible winter across the country, whatever burden Damien faced every night inside that chamber, it was growing worse. And soon the entire world would feel the consequences. The following morning began with snow. Not in Maine. Not in Minnesota. Not in the northern states where everyone expected it. Snow fell in Virginia. Thick white flakes drifted across towns that should have been enjoying autumn sunlight. News stations interrupted regular programming. Meteorologists looked confused. Government agencies issued statements filled with uncertainty. Across the country, people stared out their windows asking the same question. What was happening? Inside Blackwood Manor, every television screen displayed the same images. Snow-covered highways. Frozen lakes. School closures. Emergency response teams scrambling to understand. Conditions that should not have existed. Claire stood in Damien's study watching the reports unfold. The red markers on the digital map had doubled overnight. Entire regions were changing. Damien sat silently behind his desk. His eyes moved across incoming data with relentless focus. He had been awake all night. Claire knew because she had seen him leave the chamber less than 3 hours earlier. Yet somehow he was already working. Already solving problems. Already carrying responsibilities no one else seemed willing to acknowledge. A sharp knock interrupted the silence. Eleanor entered immediately. Her expression alone revealed the seriousness of the situation. The council has called an emergency session. Damien did not look surprised. Of course they have. They insist you attend. A brief pause followed. Damien stared at the growing red zones across the map. Prepare the conference hall. Eleanor nodded and disappeared. Claire watched him carefully. You know what they are going to do. Damien leaned back slightly. Yes. They are going after your position. Yes. And you are just going to let them? For the first time that morning he looked directly at her. What would you suggest? Claire opened her mouth. Then stopped. She did not know. The truth frustrated her. Damien returned his attention to the screens. Sometimes people need someone to blame before they are willing to face reality. An hour later the conference hall filled with council representatives from across the vampire territories. Massive windows overlooked distant mountains. Crystal chandeliers illuminated polished marble floors. Expensive suits. Controlled smiles. Carefully chosen words. Everything appeared civilized. Yet Claire could feel tension beneath the surface. Lord Ashford stood near the center of the room speaking quietly with several delegates. The moment Damien entered, conversation stopped. Hundreds of eyes followed him. Some respectful. Some skeptical. Some openly hostile. Claire took a position near the back wall beside Eleanor. The meeting began immediately. Reports were presented. Weather data. Economic forecasts. Infrastructure concerns. Population migration estimates. The numbers grew worse with every presentation. Entire regions faced conditions nobody could explain. Yet instead of focusing on solutions, the discussion slowly shifted toward Damien. Claire noticed it happening almost immediately. One representative questioned recent decisions. Another questioned communication strategies. A third questioned whether a ruler with limited mobility could effectively respond to a growing crisis. Damien answered every concern calmly. Patiently. Logically. Yet the attacks continued. By the second hour, the pattern had become impossible to ignore. They were not seeking answers. They were building a case. Ashford finally rose to speak. The room fell silent. Your Majesty. Damien nodded once. Lord Ashford. The council acknowledges your centuries of service. Claire immediately disliked the direction of the conversation. Ashford continued. However, extraordinary circumstances require extraordinary leadership. Several representatives nodded. Damien remained expressionless. Ashford folded his hands. Many believe a transition may be necessary. There it was. The words hung in the air like approaching thunder. A transition. Not a suggestion. Not a discussion. A challenge. Claire looked around the room. More than half the delegates appeared supportive. The realization shocked her. They were actually considering removing him. Removing the one person working non-stop while everyone else debated. Damien's response came quietly. And who would replace me? Ashford smiled slightly. The council would determine an appropriate candidate. Claire nearly laughed at the absurdity. Damien did not. He simply looked tired. Deeply tired. The kind of exhaustion that reached beyond physical limits. Before anyone could continue, every screen inside the conference hall suddenly flashed. Conversation stopped. Static appeared briefly. Then a live emergency broadcast filled the displays. A reporter stood in what should have been southern Tennessee. Snow covered the streets behind her. Palm trees stood coated in ice. Residents stared in disbelief. The reporter's voice shook. Temperatures have dropped 30 degrees in less than 6 hours. State officials are declaring a regional emergency. The room became silent. Another broadcast appeared. Then another. Then another. Texas. Arkansas. North Carolina. The phenomenon was spreading faster than anyone predicted. Delegates exchanged nervous glances. Ashford's confidence visibly weakened. Damien watched the screens without speaking. Claire looked at him. Suddenly something clicked. He was not surprised. Not even slightly. He had expected this. The realization sent a chill through her. How much did he know? How long had he known? The broadcasts continued for nearly 10 minutes before the conference hall returned to silence. Nobody seemed eager to continue discussing leadership transitions anymore. Yet Damien remained focused on the map. Focused on the crisis. Focused on something larger than politics. Claire noticed his hands gripping the wheelchair arms tightly. Almost too tightly. His face looked paler than ever. A faint tremor passed through his fingers. Then disappeared. Nobody else seemed to notice. Claire did. Because she was watching. Because she had started seeing things others ignored. The meeting ended shortly afterward. Delegates left in uneasy silence. Ashford departed without making eye contact. For the first time since arriving at Blackwood Manor, Claire saw uncertainty spreading among the people who had once seemed so confident. Yet Damien showed no sign of satisfaction. No victory. No relief. As the hall emptied, he remained staring at the growing storm patterns. Claire approached slowly. They backed down. Damien shook his head. No. What do you mean? His eyes remained fixed on the map. They postponed the argument. Claire followed his gaze. More red markers appeared. More snow. More impossible weather. Then Damien whispered something so quietly she almost missed it. We are running out of time. The words settled heavily in the enormous hall. And for the first time, Claire realized the crisis threatening the country might only be a symptom. The real danger was still hidden beneath Blackwood Manor. Hidden beneath ancient stone. Hidden inside the chamber Damien entered every night. Whatever he had been holding back for years was getting stronger. And soon, it might become impossible to contain. Claire could not stop thinking about those 5 words. We are running out of time. They followed her through the halls of Blackwood Manor. They echoed through every conversation. Every news report. every strange snowfall spreading across the country. By the third day, conditions had worsened dramatically. Entire cities reported record-breaking cold. Flights were delayed. Roads closed. Emergency shelters opened in states that rarely experienced winter weather. Television anchors tried to sound calm, but uncertainty had begun creeping into every broadcast. Nobody understood what was happening. Claire stood in the manor library watching coverage on a small screen when Eleanor entered carrying several folders. The older woman looked exhausted. "Another emergency meeting?" Claire asked. Eleanor nodded. 3 governors requested direct assistance this morning. Claire frowned. From Damien? From the only person who seems to know what is happening. The answer lingered in the air. Claire closed the television. Then why are they still trying to remove him? Eleanor gave a bitter smile. Because people often mistake visibility for value. Before Claire could ask what that meant, Eleanor disappeared down the corridor. The statement stayed with her. Visibility for value. Suddenly she understood. The council saw Damien's wheelchair. They saw his isolation. They saw his silence. What they did not see was everything happening behind closed doors. They did not see the endless reports. The sleepless nights. The chamber beneath the manor. They saw weakness because weakness was easier to understand than sacrifice. Later that afternoon Claire found Damien in the observatory at the top of the eastern tower. Floor-to-ceiling windows surrounded the circular room. Normally the view stretched for miles. Today gray clouds covered the horizon. Snow drifted through the air despite temperatures that should have supported autumn rain. Damien sat near one of the telescopes studying several ancient maps spread across a table. He looked even paler than before. Shadows lingered beneath his eyes. Yet he remained focused. Working. Planning. Claire approached carefully. You should rest. Damien did not look up. That suggestion has become repetitive. That does not make it less true. A faint smile appeared. Then vanished. Claire moved closer to the maps. Strange symbols covered many of them. Ancient markings she did not recognize. Mountains. Rivers. Patterns. And circles drawn around specific locations across North America. What are these? She asked. Damien remained silent for several seconds. Finally he answered. History. That is not very specific. History rarely is. Claire folded her arms. You are avoiding the question again. This time Damien actually laughed. Briefly. Quietly. You notice that? Everyone notices that. He looked at her. No. Most people stop asking. The words struck her unexpectedly. Not because of what he said. Because of how he said it. There was loneliness hidden inside the sentence. The loneliness of someone nobody challenged anymore because nobody stayed long enough to try. Claire looked down at the maps again. These locations. She pointed toward several circles. The storm started here. Damien's expression changed instantly. The smallest shift. Yet enough to confirm her suspicion. Claire's heart quickened. I am right. He leaned back slowly. For a moment she thought he might refuse to answer. Instead he surprised her. Yes. The admission felt enormous. Claire pulled out a chair and sat across from him. Then tell me. Damien stared out the window toward the falling snow. The silence stretched so long she almost thought he would change his mind. Finally he spoke. 800 years ago something happened. Claire listened carefully. What? A catastrophe. His voice remained calm. Measured. Yet she sensed how much effort the conversation required. A force beyond human understanding nearly consumed entire regions. Claire frowned. Consumed them how? Damien shook his head slightly. The details no longer matter. They matter to me. He studied her face. Then looked away again. The important part is that it was stopped. Claire glanced toward the maps. By you? Another silence. Then a single nod. Her breath caught. 800 years ago? Yes. That is impossible. For humans, perhaps. Claire stared at him. Suddenly dozens of scattered pieces began fitting together. The storms. The chamber. The exhaustion. The maps. The secret meetings. The endless responsibility. The thing beneath the matter. Damien's eyes closed briefly. Claire. It is connected. Yes. Her pulse accelerated. You have been holding it back. Damien opened his eyes. There was no pride in them. No desire for recognition. Only exhaustion. Endless exhaustion. For a very long time. The room became completely silent. Snow drifted against the glass walls surrounding the observatory. Claire could barely process what she was hearing. Every criticism. Every accusation. Every newspaper headline suddenly felt absurd. While the world mocked a king for sitting in a wheelchair, that same king had apparently spent centuries preventing something far worse from returning. Does anyone know? She asked quietly. Damien looked out toward the storm. A few. The council? A faint smile appeared. Not amused. Sad. Some of them. Claire immediately understood. The council knew. At least part of it. And they were still trying to remove him. The realization shocked her more than anything else. Before she could speak again, a sharp alarm suddenly echoed through the observatory. Red lights flashed across the walls. Damien's expression hardened instantly. He turned toward a nearby monitor. Claire followed his gaze. New markers were appearing across the map. Not dozens. Hundreds. Entire sections of the country illuminated in crimson. For the first time since arriving at Blackwood Manor, genuine concern crossed Damien's face. Not for himself. For everyone else. He stared at the screen for several seconds before speaking. It is accelerating. Claire felt cold despite the heated room. What is? Damien's eyes remained fixed on the growing red storm zones. When he finally answered, his voice was barely above a whisper. The prison is failing. The words settled over the observatory like falling ice. The prison is failing. Claire stared at Damien, waiting for him to say more, waiting for him to explain how a prison could influence weather patterns across an entire country. But Damien was already moving. His hands flew across the keyboard beside him. Maps shifted. New data appeared. Storm projections expanded farther south. Georgia. Alabama. Louisiana. Places that should have been warm were now highlighted in crimson. Every few seconds another warning flashed across the screen. How much time do we have? Claire asked. Damien remained focused on the data. Less than before. That is not an answer. It is the only one I have. His voice sounded calm, but Claire could see the tension beneath it. The small tremor had returned to his hands. The color had nearly vanished from his face. Yet he continued working as though none of it mattered. A moment later the observatory doors opened. Eleanor entered, followed by several senior staff members. One glance at the screens was enough. Their expressions darkened immediately. How bad? Eleanor asked. Damien enlarged one of the maps. Silence filled the room. Nobody needed an explanation. The answer was visible. The affected zones had nearly tripled in size since sunrise. One advisor lowered himself into a chair. That is impossible. Damien finally looked up. Unfortunately, impossible has become increasingly common. No one smiled. No one laughed. The situation had moved beyond disbelief. They were staring at reality now. A reality none of them understood. Within an hour another emergency council session was scheduled. This time the atmosphere felt different. The confidence Claire had seen earlier was gone. Fear had taken its place. Representatives arrived looking exhausted. News alerts buzzed across phones. Emergency declarations spread across multiple states. Yet despite the growing crisis, Claire noticed something unsettling. Several council members still seemed more interested in Damien than the storms themselves. It was as though they could not let go of the idea that he was the problem. The meeting began. Reports were presented. Forecasts reviewed. Resource allocations discussed. Then Lord Ashford stood once again. Claire immediately felt frustration rising inside her. Not now. Not after everything happening outside those walls. Ashford adjusted his jacket. The council requires complete transparency. Damien sat quietly at the far end of the table. Regarding the prison. The room instantly fell silent. Claire's eyes widened. So they did know. At least some of them. Ashford continued. For centuries information has been restricted. Several delegates nodded. Circumstances have changed. Damien's expression remained unreadable. Have they? The containment is failing. Ashford's voice sharpened. The council deserves answers. Claire watched carefully. For the first time she saw something flicker across Damien's face. Not anger. Not fear. Weariness. The kind that comes from repeating the same battle for too many years. The council received answers centuries ago. Ashford's jaw tightened. That was before what? Damien interrupted quietly. Nobody spoke. Damien looked around the room. Before the responsibility became inconvenient? The silence grew heavier. Claire could almost feel it pressing against the walls. Ashford glanced toward several allies before speaking again. The situation may require new leadership. Claire nearly stood from her chair. Even now. Even after all of this. Damien simply looked at him. Long enough for discomfort to spread across the room. Finally Damien turned toward the windows overlooking the mountains. Snow drifted outside despite the season. White against gray skies. Beautiful and wrong. Do you know what happens if I leave? He asked. No one answered. Do you know what happens if the prison loses its anchor? Silence. Do you know what happens if containment breaks completely? Ashford opened his mouth. Closed it. Said nothing. Damien nodded slowly. That is what I thought. Claire saw something then. Something she had missed before. None of them actually understood. They knew pieces. Fragments. Rumors passed through generations. But they did not understand the true cost. They never had. The meeting ended without resolution. Delegates left looking shaken. Several avoided Damien entirely. Others looked at him with expressions Claire could not decipher. Guilt, perhaps. Or uncertainty. As the room emptied, Claire remained behind. Damien sat alone near the window. Snow continued falling beyond the glass. Why do you keep protecting them? She asked quietly. Damien did not look away from the storm. You asked me that before. And I still do not understand. He was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke. Because someone has to. Claire moved closer. Even the ones trying to remove you? A faint smile appeared. Sad and tired. Especially them. The answer hit harder than she expected. Most people would have demanded gratitude. Recognition. Respect. Damien demanded nothing. Not because he was weak. Because somewhere along the way he had accepted that responsibility and recognition were not the same thing. Night arrived quickly. The storm intensified. Wind rattled the windows of Blackwood Manor. Across the country emergency broadcasts continued. More snow. More cold. More confusion. Shortly after midnight, Claire found herself standing once again outside the chamber beneath the manor. This time the door was already open. Damien sat at the center of the ancient symbols. Candles surrounded him. Silver light flowed through the cracks in the stone floor. Stronger than before. Much stronger. Claire stepped inside. Damien looked up. For several seconds neither spoke. Then he surprised her. You should not be here. I know. Yet you came anyway. Yes. The corner of his mouth twitched slightly. Then his gaze drifted toward the glowing floor. The light pulsed beneath him. Once. Twice. 3 times. The chamber trembled faintly. Claire felt her heart begin to race. Something was different tonight. Something had changed. Damien closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them again, they seemed older somehow. More distant. More exhausted. He looked at the glowing symbols. Then at Claire. And for the first time since she arrived at Blackwood Manor, she saw uncertainty in him. Not about the prison. Not about the storms. About himself. It lasted only a second before disappearing. Yet Claire saw it. And she knew instinctively that whatever happened next would change everything. Claire stood motionless as silver light flowed through the ancient cracks beneath Damien's chair. The chamber felt different tonight. The air carried a strange heaviness. As though the stone walls themselves were holding their breath. Outside, somewhere beyond the manor, snow continued falling across states that should never have seen winter. Inside, the glow beneath the floor pulsed steadily like the heartbeat of something old and powerful. Damien lowered his gaze. For the first time since Claire had met him, he looked uncertain. Not uncertain about what needed to be done. Uncertain about whether he could continue doing it. The realization frightened her more than the storms. What is happening? She asked quietly. Damien looked toward the center symbol carved into the floor. The largest one. The oldest one. The anchor is weakening. Claire stepped closer. You mean the prison? He nodded. For centuries it remained stable. Every year became more difficult. Every decade demanded more. The silver light brightened briefly. Damien's hands tightened against the arms of his wheelchair. Now it is beginning to fail faster than expected. Claire glanced around the chamber. Can it be repaired? A long silence followed. Finally Damien answered. Not permanently. The words landed heavily between them. Claire stared at him. Then what happens? Damien looked away. Someone must continue maintaining it. Claire felt her stomach tighten. She already knew the answer before he spoke it. You. Another pause. For as long as possible. The chamber trembled faintly. Silver light raced through the symbols before slowly settling again. Claire noticed fresh cracks spreading through parts of the stone floor. Tiny fractures. Yet they had not been there yesterday. The sight sent a chill through her. How long have you been doing this alone? Damien smiled faintly. Not because the question amused him. Because it sounded impossible when spoken aloud. Long enough that I stopped counting. Claire looked at him carefully. The exhaustion she had witnessed over the past week suddenly made sense. The isolation. The secrecy. The endless work. Every night he entered this chamber. Every day he carried the responsibilities of an entire nation. And somehow the world still called him weak. The unfairness of it made her angry. A sharp sound interrupted her. Thoughts. Somewhere above them, alarms began echoing through the manor. Damien immediately looked toward the ceiling. Eleanor's voice crackled through a communication panel near the entrance. Your Majesty. The council has arrived. Damien closed his eyes briefly. Now? They insist the matter cannot wait. Claire watched his expression harden. Not with anger. with resignation. The kind worn by people who expected disappointment before it arrived. "Prepare the hall," Damien replied quietly. The communication ended. For several seconds neither moved. Then Damien turned his wheelchair toward the exit. Claire followed him. The moment they emerged from the chamber, she noticed activity throughout the manor. Staff members hurried through corridors. Security teams moved into position. Tension hung everywhere. News screens displayed worsening weather reports. Entire regions faced emergency conditions. Yet despite all of it, the council had chosen this moment to arrive. The grand hall filled quickly. Representatives occupied every seat. Lord Ashford stood near the front speaking with several supporters. When Damien entered, conversation stopped. Claire immediately sensed something different. The atmosphere felt final. Ashford stepped forward. "Your Majesty." Damien nodded once. "Lord Ashford." Ashford looked around the room before speaking. "The council has reached a decision." Claire felt her pulse quicken. Several delegates avoided eye contact. Others appeared nervous. Damien remained calm. "I see." Ashford unfolded a document. Due to ongoing concerns regarding leadership capacity and the worsening national crisis, a formal vote has been requested. The room fell silent. Claire could hardly believe what she was hearing. Even now. Even after everything. They still thought removing Damien would solve the problem. Ashford continued reading. Words about responsibility. Stability. Public confidence. Political necessity. Claire barely heard them. Her attention remained fixed on Damien. He sat quietly through the entire speech. No anger. No defense. No attempt to stop what was happening. When Ashford finally finished, the room waited. Damien looked toward the snow-covered mountains beyond the windows. Then he spoke. "Very well." Murmurs spread through the hall. Even Ashford appeared surprised. "You accept the vote?" Damien nodded. "If that is what the council wants." Claire stared at him in disbelief. "Accept? After everything he had sacrificed? After everything he continued sacrificing every night?" The delegates began preparing for the vote. Papers moved across tables. Officials organized procedures. The entire room focused on politics while a crisis spread across the country. Claire could not understand it. Then Damien quietly turned his head toward her. Their eyes met across the room. For a brief moment all the noise disappeared. The delegates. The arguments. The vote. None of it seemed to matter. Damien's expression looked impossibly tired. Older than she had ever seen it. Older than centuries. And then, in a voice so soft that only she could hear, he spoke. "I am still a monster, Claire." The words froze her. Not because they were frightening. Because they were heartbreaking. After everything she had learned, after everything she had witnessed, that was how he saw himself. Not as a protector. Not as a king. Not as the man who had spent centuries carrying a burden no one else would carry. A monster. Claire felt something shift inside her. Around them, council members continued preparing for the vote. They had no idea what he had done for them. No idea what he continued doing for them. No idea who they were about to condemn. And for the first time since arriving at Blackwood Manor, Claire knew exactly what she needed to do. Claire stood before she even realized she was moving. The scrape of her chair against the marble floor echoed through the hall. Every conversation stopped. Every delegate turned toward her. Lord Ashford frowned. Several council members looked confused. Claire barely noticed. Her attention remained fixed on Damien. On the man sitting silently beside the window. On the man who had just called himself a monster after spending centuries protecting people who would never know his sacrifice. She stepped forward. "No. The word cut through the silence. Ashford blinked. Miss Bennet, this proceeding does not involve, no, Claire repeated. Louder this time. Stronger. The room froze. Even Damien looked surprised. Claire turned toward the assembled council. Her heart pounded. Her hands trembled. But her voice remained steady. You call him weak because he sits in a wheelchair. Nobody spoke. You question his leadership because he does not defend himself. The silence deepened. Claire looked from one face to another. You criticize him because you think you know the whole story. Several delegates shifted uncomfortably. Ashford's expression darkened. Miss Bennet, you do not understand the situation. Claire met his gaze. No. You do not. The words landed like thunder. Murmurs spread across the hall. Claire continued before anyone could interrupt. While all of you argued about titles and positions, he was working. She pointed toward Damien. While you debated leadership, he was protecting people. More silence. More uncomfortable expressions. Claire felt years of frustration rising inside her. Not her own frustration. Damien's. The frustration he never allowed himself to show. Do you know why he looks exhausted? She asked. No one answered. Do you know why the storms have not already become worse? Still silence. Claire's voice softened. Do you know what he has given up? Nobody did. That was the point. Claire turned toward the enormous windows overlooking the snow-covered mountains. Every person in this room knows part of the truth. Her gaze swept across the delegates. But none of you wanted to look at all of it. Lord Ashford opened his mouth to object. Claire stopped him immediately. If you think he kept the prison stable because it benefited him, then you have not been paying attention. She looked directly at Damien. A selfish man would have walked away centuries ago. The hall remained completely silent. Claire took a breath. Then she spoke the words that changed everything. A monster does not spend hundreds of years carrying a burden for people who hate him. No one moved. No one spoke. Even the air seemed frozen. Claire looked back toward the council. A monster does not sacrifice everything to keep strangers safe. Her voice shook slightly now. Not from fear. From conviction. And a monster certainly does not continue protecting people who are trying to replace him. Tears appeared in the eyes of one elderly delegate near the back. Another lowered his head. Ashford looked away. For the first time since entering the hall, nobody seemed interested in arguing. Claire's gaze returned to Damien. You are not a monster. The words hung in the silence. Simple. Honest. Unavoidable. For several seconds Damien did not react. Then something changed. The wall he had carried for centuries cracked. Not dramatically. Not visibly. But Claire saw it. The loneliness. The doubt. The exhaustion. All of it surfaced briefly inside his silver eyes. Around the room, people began realizing what they had ignored for too long. Eleanor stepped forward first. Then another advisor. Then another. One by one, voices began speaking. Not in defense of Damien's authority. In recognition of his sacrifice. Information emerged. Historical records. Ancient agreements. Forgotten archives. Testimonies from generations of caretakers and scholars. Piece by piece, the truth finally surfaced. By the time the final report was presented, nobody questioned what Damien had done. Nobody questioned why the prison existed. And nobody questioned who had been holding it together. The vote never happened. It simply ceased to matter. Over the following weeks, everything changed. Scientists, historians, and magical researchers worked together under Damien's guidance. For the first time in centuries, the responsibility was shared. New containment systems were developed. Ancient methods improved. Resources were allocated not toward politics, but toward solutions. Progress came slowly. Then steadily. The storm stopped spreading. Temperature stabilized. Snow gradually retreated from places it never should have reached. Across the country, life returned to normal. Most people never learned how close they had come to disaster. They never learned the name of the man who had protected them. Damien seemed perfectly content with that. Several months later, winter arrived naturally. Not through magic. Not through catastrophe. Just winter. Claire stood in the gardens of Blackwood Manor watching fresh snow settle across the hills. The sky glowed pale gold beneath the afternoon sun. Footsteps approached behind her. She turned. And froze. Damien stood several yards away. Standing. Not perfectly. Not effortlessly. A polished cane supported part of his weight. The recovery had taken months. Countless hours. Endless determination. Yet he was standing. Claire smiled immediately. Look at you. Damien glanced down at himself. A remarkable achievement. You walked all the way out here? Slowly. Claire laughed. Damien smiled in return. A real smile this time. Unforced. Genuine. The kind she had rarely seen. They stood together overlooking the snow-covered valley. Peaceful. Quiet. Finally Damien spoke. You changed everything. Claire shook her head. No. She looked toward the distant mountains. I just told the truth. Damien was silent for a moment. Then he nodded. As the sun dipped lower across the horizon, golden light spread over the manor, the forests, and the endless hills beyond. For the first time in centuries, the burden was no longer carried by one person alone. And for the first time in a very long time, the king who had spent generations protecting everyone else finally allowed himself to believe something Claire had known from the beginning. He had never been the monster in the story. He had always been the reason the story survived.